she froze at the door, clutching the tray of fresh bread. For the third morning in a row, the bear was sitting there, silent, patient, almost polite. But this time, she couldn't ignore him. She opened the door, and what happened next shocked everyone in town. The bell above the bakery door had just stopped ringing when Sarah froze. Her hands, still dusted with flour, clutched the tray of steaming bread so tightly that one of the loaves cracked under her grip. Out on the quiet street, just past the stone steps leading to her shop, he was there again. The bear. A massive brown silhouette, sitting as still as a stone statue. His eyes weren't wild, not even aggressive, they were fixed, calm, waiting. Sarah's breath caught. She had seen him yesterday. And the day before. Always at the same time, just after dawn, when the smell of rising bread drifted through the air. Most people in town wouldn't believe it if she told them. A bear that didn't raid trash bins, didn't claw at doors, didn't snarl. He just waited. Sarah tried to shake the thought from her mind. She nudged the bakery door shut with her hip and carried the tray back inside, muttering to herself, "Don't feed him, don't encourage him." That was the rule the forest rangers always repeated. But something about this animal was different. He wasn't lurking in the shadows. He wasn't rummaging through scraps. He was watching her bakery. By the time she stacked the loaves in the display case, her nerves hadn't settled. She peeked through the window again. He was still there. Unmoved. Her heart raced. What would the neighbors say if they saw him? Would someone call the rangers? Would they think he was dangerous? The town of Alder Creek was small, the kind of place where rumors spread faster than smoke from the bakery oven. Sarah couldn't imagine explaining, "Yes, there's a bear outside my bakery every morning, but he doesn't scare me." She shook her head and went back to kneading dough for the next batch. She tried to focus on the rhythm of it, fold, press, stretch, but her ears stayed alert to every sound outside. That's when the scratching began. A soft scrape at the wooden door. Not violent, not frantic. Almost polite. Sarah's hands froze mid-fold. Her chest tightened as she glanced up, eyes darting to the door. He was closer now. His paw, enormous and heavy, rested against the bottom of the frame. A single low huff of breath fogged the glass. Her first instinct was fear. What if the bear pushed harder? What if today was different? Her mind spun with warnings she'd read in ranger leaflets: never feed wildlife. Never let them associate food with humans. But then something unexpected happened. The bear sat back down. Slowly. Deliberately. His paw slid away from the door, and he simply waited again. Sarah's pulse slowed, but her curiosity grew stronger than her fear. Why wasn't he breaking in? Why wasn't he leaving either? And then it struck her, the smell. The moment she pulled a new loaf from the oven, the bear's head tilted. His nose twitched, catching the wave of warmth and yeast. He wasn't here for scraps. He wasn't here to threaten her. He was here for the bread itself. Sarah whispered under her breath, "You're waiting for breakfast, aren't you?" The idea was ridiculous. A wild animal waiting like a polite customer at her door. And yet, that's exactly what it looked like. She stepped closer, her hands trembling slightly, until she was only a foot from the door. The bear's eyes met hers through the glass. They were steady, almost gentle. Her fingers grazed the handle. Every voice of reason screamed against it. But her heart told her something else. She took a breath. And she opened the door. The smell of bread spilled into the morning air, wrapping around the silence of the street. The bear's ears perked. His body shifted, but he didn't lunge. He didn't roar. He stayed seated, watching her carefully. Sarah's hand shook as she lifted the warmest loaf from the tray. The steam curled into the cold dawn air. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Her thoughts spun, what am I doing? What if someone sees? What if this changes everything? And then? The bear stood. The sheer size of him filled her vision, towering, his shadow stretching across the bakery steps. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Would he take the bread? Or was this the moment everything went wrong? What would you have done in Sarah's place, kept the door locked, or offered the bear a loaf? Sarah's fingers tightened around the loaf, her knuckles white against the dark crust. She could hear her own heartbeat, louder than the quiet of the empty street. The bear's movement was slow, deliberate. He wasn't charging. He wasn't aggressive. But when a creature that size rises to full height, every instinct in your body screams run. Sarah didn't. Instead, she stayed on the bakery's stone threshold, frozen in a mixture of fear and wonder. The bear's nose twitched, pulling in the steam from the bread. His ears flicked at the faint hum of the ovens behind her, as if he understood that inside those walls was the source of what he wanted. Sarah lifted the loaf a little higher. Easy now, she whispered, as if he could understand. And then, in one smooth motion, the bear leaned down. Not toward her face. Not toward her trembling hands. Toward the bread. His snout brushed the loaf, and with the gentlest motion she could have imagined from such a massive animal, he took it. Sarah gasped. No teeth clamped down. No violent grab. Just a slow, careful pull. The bread slipped from her hands, warm and whole, into his. He lowered himself again, settling back on the cobblestones. His paws cradled the loaf the way a person might hold something fragile. Sarah blinked, unable to believe what she was seeing. The bear began to eat. Not with the frantic tearing of an animal raiding garbage, but almost politely. He broke chunks off with his teeth, chewed, and swallowed. The sound of him eating filled the silence of the morning, soft and rhythmic. Sarah's lips parted in disbelief. "You're civilized," she murmured. Her fear began to slip into something else, awe. She was standing only feet away from a full-grown bear, and yet she didn't feel threatened. But then, footsteps echoed from down the street. Sarah's head whipped around. Old Mr. Kincaid, the milk delivery driver, was shuffling toward the bakery with 2 heavy cans in hand. He was muttering to himself, not looking up, until he did. The cans clanged against each other as he froze. His eyes widened, his jaw slack. "Good Lord, Sarah. Get inside." The shout broke the quiet. The bear's ears flicked back, his body tensing. Sarah's stomach dropped. She could see the shift in him, the calm broken by the sudden sharpness of human voices. "Don't yell," she hissed at Mr. Kincaid, waving her arms in panic. "You'll spook him." But it was too late. The bear turned his massive head toward the old man, nostrils flaring. He didn't roar, but the sound that rumbled from his chest was low and deep, a warning Sarah felt in her bones. Mr. Kincaid stumbled back, nearly dropping the milk cans. "That thing's dangerous," he shouted. "I'm calling the Rangers." Sarah's heart raced. If the Rangers came, they wouldn't see what she saw. They wouldn't see patience or gentleness. They'd see a threat. And bears labeled threats in Alder Creek didn't get second chances. She stepped off the bakery stoop, hands out, putting herself between the bear and Mr. Kincaid. "Sarah, what are you doing?" the old man cried, voice trembling. Her answer came without hesitation. "Protecting him." The bear shifted again, his eyes fixed on the two humans now standing in the cold morning street. His loaf of bread was nearly gone, crumbs dusting his paws. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment, one wrong sound, one wrong move, and the fragile piece could shatter. She whispered over her shoulder, "Please, Mr. Kincaid, don't call anyone. Just go." The old man's face twisted between fear and disbelief. "You can't be serious. That bear'll kill you." Sarah shook her head. If he wanted to, he already would've. And for a moment, it seemed to work. The bear lowered his head again, licking the last crumbs from his fur. The tension ebbed, the dangerous growl subsided, and his eyes softened once more. Sarah exhaled slowly. Maybe, just maybe, it was over. Then, without warning, the bear stood again. Taller this time. His attention no longer on the bread, but on Sarah. He stepped closer. One heavy paw onto the stone step. Then another. Mr. Kincaid dropped one of his milk cans with a clang, stumbling backward in terror. The sound echoed off the narrow street walls. The bear didn't flinch. He was moving toward her. Sarah's pulse hammered as she realized she was no longer just a baker handing out bread. She was something more in his eyes now. Something he was choosing to approach. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The bear's massive head lowered until his snout was only inches from her chest. She could feel the heat of his breath through her apron. His eyes locked onto hers, deep, steady, searching. Sarah's throat tightened. What was he looking for? Another loaf? A gesture? Something she couldn't yet understand? Behind her, Mr. Kincaid's voice cracked, "Sarah, don't move." But Sarah already knew she couldn't. The bear wasn't finished with her. And as his paw shifted again, this time landing squarely on the threshold of her bakery door, Sarah realized with a jolt of fear. He wasn't waiting outside anymore. He wanted in. If the bear stepped toward your open bakery door, would you let him inside or slam it shut? The threshold creaked beneath the bear's weight, and Sarah's breath caught. The smell of yeast and sugar filled the air, drawing him forward inch by inch. His massive body blocked the early sunlight, casting a shadow across the bakery floor. Inside, the ovens hummed, the scent of cinnamon rolls just beginning to rise. To Sarah, those smells were ordinary, comfort, livelihood, routine. But to the bear, it was something else entirely. Something irresistible. Her hands trembled at her sides. Part of her screamed to slam the door, to push him back, to save herself and her bakery. Another part whispered something strange, "Trust him." Behind her, Mr. Kincaid's voice cracked again, "Sarah, for God's sake, close it. He'll wreck the place." The bear's head turned slightly, acknowledging the old man's presence, but his eyes returned to Sarah. It was as if the rest of the world didn't matter, only her, and what lay inside her bakery. Sarah spoke, her voice barely more than a breath. "You can't come in, this isn't your place." But the bear stepped closer. His claws clicked against the wooden floorboards, echoing like thunder in her small shop. Sarah backed away, keeping her gaze locked on his, every muscle tense. She was no longer at the doorway, she was retreating deeper into her bakery, step by step, the bear following like a silent shadow. The morning quiet was broken by the sudden clang of the milk can outside. Mr. Kincaid had stumbled again, and the sound sent a tremor through the bear. His ears flattened, his muscles stiffened. "Stop it." Sarah snapped toward the doorway, fear sharp in her voice. "You're scaring him." Mr. Kincaid gawked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Scaring him? Sarah, it's a bear." But Sarah's instincts told her something different. He wasn't attacking. He wasn't destroying. He was following the smell, curious, cautious, and, unbelievably, waiting for her to guide him. She reached the counter, her palms pressing against the cool wood as the bear loomed just feet away. He sniffed at the trays of fresh bread stacked neatly behind the glass. His nose bumped the counter, fogging the glass with each exhale. Sarah's heart pounded. She had to make a choice. Carefully, she lifted one of the loaves from the tray. The steam curled upward, filling the space between them. The bear's eyes tracked the movement instantly. "All right," she whispered, holding it out. "But only this once." She extended the bread across the counter. For a terrifying moment, the bear's claws scraped the wood as he reached forward, his snout brushing dangerously close to her arms. Sarah flinched, bracing herself for the worst. But again, gentleness. The loaf disappeared from her hands into his jaws, not torn or crushed, but taken carefully. He stepped back, chewing in deliberate silence, as if savoring it. Sarah's chest heaved. She had done it again. But outside, Mr. Kincaid wasn't convinced. His voice shook with anger and fear. "Sarah, this can't go on. You'll get yourself killed, and the rest of us too when that beast comes back tomorrow." The words struck her hard. Tomorrow. She hadn't thought about tomorrow. Was this a one-time miracle, or had she just started something she couldn't stop? The bear finished the loaf, licking crumbs from his fur, then sat down heavily in the middle of her shop. The absurdity of it hit her, a wild brown bear, sitting calmly inside her bakery like a paying customer. Sarah's throat tightened. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, more to herself than him. The bear huffed, a sound low and soft, almost like an answer. His eyes locked onto hers again, steady, unblinking. And then? He lowered himself onto the floorboards, curling slightly, as though he intended to wait. Sarah's mouth went dry. He wasn't leaving. Mr. Kincaid slammed the side of the doorframe with his fist. "That's it, Sarah. I'm going to get help. This ends now." Her eyes darted toward him in panic. "No, don't. Please." But the old man was already shuffling away down the street, muttering curses under his breath. Sarah's stomach dropped. If he called the Rangers, it would be over. She turned back toward the bear, whose calm gaze hadn't shifted. Her mind raced. She had a matter of minutes, maybe less, before men with trucks, tranquilizers, or worse would arrive. She swallowed hard. "If you're going to stay," she said softly, "I have to figure out why. Because if they come, they won't see you the way I do." The bear shifted his weight, his massive frame filling the small bakery space. His ears perked as the ovens beeped, the cinnamon rolls were ready. The warm, sugary scent filled the air. And the bear stood again, moving toward the sound. Sarah froze. The ovens. The trays. The hot metal. If he pushed too far, if he touched one, he could burn himself, or worse, panic in the small space. Her heart thundered. She had to act fast. She grabbed a pair of tongs and a tray of rolls, pulling them free in a rush of steam. The bear's head snapped toward her instantly. His eyes locked onto the fresh pastries, his nose twitching with desperate hunger. Sarah's voice broke as she whispered, "Please, don't make me choose between saving you and saving myself." The bear stepped forward again, inches from the hot oven, inches from her trembling hands. What would you do if the bear started moving deeper into the bakery? Stop him or feed him again? The hiss of steam filled the bakery, carrying the thick, sweet aroma of cinnamon and sugar. The bear's nose twitched rapidly, his whole body angling toward the tray Sarah held in trembling hands. He was too close to the ovens now. One wrong step and his fur could brush against the hot metal, a burn that might send him thrashing through her shop. "Stay back," Sarah pleaded, her voice shaking but steady enough to cut through the silence. She raised the tray slightly, trying to guide his eyes away from the glowing ovens. The bear paused, sniffed, and then, with surprising patience, stepped toward her instead of the machines. Sarah exhaled in shaky relief. "That's right, here, not there." She placed the tray gently on the counter, sliding it just far enough away from the ovens but close enough for him to reach. Steam curled around them both, filling the air with warmth. The bear leaned forward, lowering his massive head. With the same impossible gentleness she'd seen before, he nudged one roll free with his snout, catching it with his teeth. The pastry vanished in seconds. Sarah blinked at the sight, a wild bear, savoring a cinnamon roll like a child in a candy shop. Another roll disappeared, then another. Crumbs scattered across the counter, a surreal mess of sugar and fur. But instead of chaos, there was calm. Sarah found herself whispering, half in awe, "You just wanted breakfast." But the fragile peace didn't last. The sound of a truck engine rumbled faintly from down the street. Sarah's blood ran cold. Mr. Kincaid. She darted to the bakery window, peeking through the lace curtains. The old man was gesturing frantically to two uniformed figures stepping out of a ranger truck. Their expressions were sharp, focused, already scanning for danger. "No, no, no," Sarah muttered, panic tightening her chest. "They'll see him." The bear, still working through the rolls, seemed oblivious. But Sarah knew what would happen if the rangers walked in. They wouldn't see patience or gentleness. They'd see claws, teeth, and risk. Her heart pounded. She had minutes, maybe seconds. She turned back toward the bear, who had now finished the tray and sat once again on the floor, licking sugar from his paws. He looked content. Safe. As if this bakery had somehow become his den. Sarah's voice was urgent, whispering fiercely. "You can't stay here. They won't understand." The bear tilted his head at her, uncomprehending but steady. The doorbell jingled suddenly as the bakery door creaked open. Sarah's stomach flipped. The rangers stepped inside. Two of them, a tall man with a clipboard and a younger woman with wary eyes scanning every corner. Behind them, Mr. Kincaid hovered nervously, his face pale with fear. And then their eyes landed on him. The bear. A hush fell so heavy it seemed to smother the warm sense of bread and sugar. The younger ranger's hand shot to her hip, where a tranquilizer gun hung at her belt. Sarah stepped forward instinctively, her arms spread wide. "Wait. Ma'am, move aside," the older ranger barked, his voice calm but commanding. "We'll handle this." "No." Sarah's shout cracked through the bakery. "He's not dangerous." The rangers exchanged looks, their postures tightening. The bear shifted slightly, not aggressive, but aware of the new tension in the room. His ears flicked, his muscles tensed. Sarah's heart pounded. Every nerve screamed at her that one wrong word, one wrong gesture, and the story would end here. She forced herself to steady her breathing, then spoke quickly. "He's been here 3 mornings in a row. He waits outside. He doesn't growl, doesn't attack, doesn't break anything. He's just hungry. The younger ranger frowned. Ma'am, bears don't wait politely for food. This is dangerous behavior. If he's associating people with food. Sarah cut her off. Look at him. He's calm. He's sitting. He's not forcing anything. He's choosing to wait. Doesn't that mean something? The bear blinked slowly, his body lowering as if to emphasize her point. He wasn't threatening them. He wasn't moving at all. But the older ranger shook his head. It doesn't matter how calm he looks. Once an animal learns to link humans with food, it's only a matter of time before it turns bad. The policy is clear. The word policy rang in Sarah's ears like a death knell. She knew what it meant, relocation at best, a bullet at worst. Her throat tightened. She couldn't let that happen. The bear shifted again, his snout lifting toward her as if sensing her distress. For a fleeting second, it looked as if he was waiting for her to decide. Sarah's mind raced. She couldn't fight the rangers. She couldn't argue policy. But maybe she could prove something they hadn't seen before. She turned to the counter, grabbed one of the last remaining loaves of bread, and stepped right in front of the bear. The younger ranger hissed, "Ma'am, stop." Sarah ignored her. She held the bread aloft, her voice steady now. "Watch." The bear's eyes followed the loaf immediately. Sarah took a breath, heart hammering, and then, instead of handing it to him, she placed it back on the counter. She stepped away. The bear remained still. His eyes flicked between Sarah and the loaf. Seconds dragged into eternity. The rangers held their breath, weapons at the ready. And then, the bear lowered his head. He didn't lunge. He didn't swipe. He waited. Sarah's lips trembled. She whispered, barely audible, "See? He's not dangerous. He's patient." For the first time, doubt flickered across the older ranger's stern face. The younger ranger's grip on her tranquilizer loosened slightly. The bear's steady gaze never left Sarah. His body language was calm, his breathing even. But then, outside the bakery, a child's voice called out across the street. "Mommy! Look! A bear!" The words sliced through the fragile moment like a blade. The bear's head whipped toward the sound. His body stiffened, ears forward, muscles taut. And Sarah felt her stomach drop. Because now, the entire town was about to know. If the whole town saw the bear at the bakery, would they react with fear or wonder? The bakery bell chimed again as more voices filled the street. The child's cry had carried farther than Sarah feared. Within minutes, curious neighbors and early morning shoppers gathered outside, pressing close to the windows, their breath fogging the glass. The bear sat motionless, massive frame outlined against the glow of the ovens, while Sarah stood protectively between him and the rangers. "Good Lord," someone whispered from outside. "Is it dangerous?" another voice murmured. Phones lifted. Flashes burst against the bakery glass. The bear's ears twitched at the noise, his body tense but unmoving. Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. She could feel the weight of every eye in town, fear, fascination, judgment. The older ranger turned sharply toward her. "This has gone far enough. You're putting everyone at risk. We need to secure the bear before anyone gets hurt." But Sarah stepped forward, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. "He hasn't hurt anyone. He didn't break in. He waited. Just like he has every morning." The younger ranger shook her head. "That's not normal. Wild animals don't wait in line for food. He's already associating this bakery with people and meals. That makes him unpredictable. Unpredictable? Sarah challenged. Or adaptable? Her words rippled through the crowd outside. Whispers spread, uncertain but curious. Mr. Kincaid, still hovering at the doorway, raised his cane. You're blind if you can't see the danger. He'll be back tomorrow and the next day, until one of us ends up in his stomach. Murmurs of agreement bubbled through the crowd. Fear had a way of growing faster than truth. Sarah's throat tightened. She glanced at the bear, who sat as still as a stone, watching her as though waiting for her to decide his fate. An idea sparked. Risky. Reckless. But it might be the only way. She reached behind the counter and pulled out a fresh loaf of bread. The crust cracked warm beneath her fingers. With deliberate slowness, she turned toward the bear. Gasps rose from the crowd. She's feeding it, someone shouted. She's crazy. Ignoring them, Sarah held the loaf high. The bear's dark eyes followed every movement. And then she walked, not to him, but to the front door. She opened it wide, letting the cool morning air sweep through the bakery. Out here, she called softly. Her tone wasn't commanding, but inviting. The bear blinked. His great head swiveled between her and the bread. For a tense heartbeat, no one breathed. Then, with a slow and lumbering grace, he rose. His claws clicked against the tile, his shadow spilling across the bakery floor. Every gasp outside grew sharper as he approached the open doorway. Sarah stepped back, holding the loaf outward, guiding him carefully. Step by step, the bear followed, until sunlight struck his fur and the street fell utterly silent. The crowd parted in awe and terror as the bear stood there, massive against the backdrop of the small mountain town. Sarah placed the loaf gently on the cobblestones. The bear lowered his head, sniffed, and then, with the same patience as before, took it delicately between his teeth. He settled onto his haunches, eating calmly as though he belonged here. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts. Some laughed nervously. Others clung tighter. He's just eating bread, one child whispered. The rangers exchanged uncertain looks. Mr. Kincaid sputtered in frustration. You can't let this stand. Today it's bread, tomorrow it's one of us. But Sarah turned to the crowd, her voice rising. Look at him. Really look. Has he hurt anyone? Has he even growled? He's patient, gentle, and hungry, nothing more. We share these mountains with wildlife every day. Maybe this one is just showing us a different way. The younger ranger hesitated, eyes softening as she studied the bear's calm posture. But the older ranger's jaw stayed tight. This is not how things work, ma'am. Policy is. Maybe policy needs to meet reality, Sarah interrupted. Her voice carried, louder now. We've all seen bears raid garbage bins, tear into cars, even get aggressive when startled. But this one? He waited. He respected the space. That has to mean something. The townsfolk shifted uneasily, torn between fear and wonder. Maybe he learned it from us, Sarah continued, her chest tightening with urgency. Maybe he's been watching. Maybe he's proving that coexistence is possible. The bear lifted his head then, a crumb-dusted snout turning toward the crowd. His eyes were calm, dark pools reflecting the morning light. For a breathless moment, he seemed almost to be listening. The silence stretched, heavy with decision. Then, unexpectedly, a voice rang out. He's kind of beautiful. It came from the same child who had first spotted him. The little boy stepped forward, his small hand gripping his mother's fingers. He's not scary. He just wants breakfast. Laughter rippled nervously through the crowd. But with it came a subtle shift, the raw edge of fear dulled, replaced by a fragile thread of curiosity. The bear finished the loaf, licking crumbs from the stones, then sat back down calmly, as though he were simply waiting for more. The younger ranger lowered her hand completely from her tranquilizer. Her voice was thoughtful. "I've never seen behavior like this." The older ranger scowled, but his certainty had cracked. Unnatural or not, it's drawing attention. Too much attention. If this continues, people are going to come here looking for him. That's just as dangerous. The crowd stirred again, not with fear this time, but debate. Some nodded in agreement, others whispered that maybe the bear could become the town's quiet mascot. Sarah knew the battle wasn't won. But she had shifted something. And yet, as she looked at the bear sitting serenely at her doorstep, another thought struck her, one that gnawed deeper than policy or fear. What if this peace was fragile? What if tomorrow, or next week, hunger drove him to break the pattern? Her heart ached with the question. But for now, in this moment, the town was watching a bear eat bread instead of fearing for their lives. And Sarah wasn't sure whether that was the beginning of a miracle or the start of a storm. If the town starts embracing the bear's visits, will it bring harmony or disaster? The town didn't quiet down after that morning. If anything, it grew louder. By noon, whispers of the bakery bear were everywhere. At the market, people traded stories with wide eyes, some swearing they'd seen him before, slipping through the trees at dusk, others insisting Sarah had lost her mind. By evening, photos were already spreading online. A grainy video showed the bear sitting calmly outside her bakery, a loaf clamped delicately in his jaws. The caption read, "A bear who waits politely for bread? Only in Pine Hollow." And just like that, Sarah's small mountain town was no longer anonymous. The next morning, she rose before dawn, heart heavy with nerves. She baked quietly, the smell of yeast filling the shop, wondering if the bear would come again. Wondering if she even wanted him to. At 6:30 sharp, the bell over the door jingled. Not from a person, from the shift of air as a massive shadow passed by the window. He was back. The bear lowered himself to the cobblestones outside, paws tucked neatly, eyes fixed on the bakery door. Just as before. But this time, he wasn't alone. 3 cars idled on the street, their headlights still on. Tourists. Strangers. They leaned out with phones, lenses glinting. Sarah froze. Already? It had taken less than 24 hours. The bear shifted uneasily under the clicking shutters but didn't move. His patience was steady, but his ears flicked with agitation. Sarah's chest tightened. The calm she had admired was fragile now, stretched thin under a tension he hadn't asked for. She stepped outside quickly, holding a loaf. The tourists gasped, voices overlapping. "She's feeding him. Get closer, get closer." "No." Sarah snapped before she could stop herself. Her voice rang sharp against the morning stillness. "Stay back. He's not a show." But they didn't listen. One man moved closer, camera raised high. The bear's head lifted, a low breath rumbling in his chest. Not a growl, just a warning. But enough to slice Sarah's nerves raw. She threw the loaf gently in front of him, urging him to focus. He bent down, sniffed, and began to eat. The tourists laughed nervously, filming every bite. Sarah's hands shook as she returned inside. She had wanted to prove he wasn't a threat, but now, with strangers circling him like he was a circus act, she wondered if she'd done the opposite. By mid-afternoon, the Rangers returned. This time, they weren't just two. 3 trucks rolled in, uniforms stiff, radios crackling. The older Ranger wasted no time. "This is spiraling, Miss Harper. Videos are circulating. People are coming here on purpose. This is exactly the kind of human-animal dependency we're sworn to prevent." Sarah bristled. "He hasn't hurt anyone yet," he said firmly. "But you've turned him into a spectacle. He's being rewarded for approaching people. That's dangerous. You know it, and deep down, so does everyone in this town." The younger Ranger spoke more softly. "We're not blind. His behavior is unique. But unique doesn't mean safe." Outside, more locals gathered. Some nodded along with the Rangers, muttering that the bear should be relocated before someone got hurt. Others defended him fiercely. "He's never touched anyone. He waits like a gentleman. Better manners than half the people in this town." The debate spilled into the street, voices rising until it felt less like Pine Hollow and more like a divided courtroom. Sarah stood in the middle, torn in two. Mr. Kincaid pushed forward again, his voice sharp as his cane. "This bakery has become a liability. If you don't put a stop to this, the state will. And don't think they'll hesitate to do what needs to be done." The implication hung heavy in the air. Sarah's throat closed. She imagined the bear, patient, calm, unaware of the storm his presence had unleashed, and felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it startled her. "Please," she whispered. "He's not just a problem to be solved. He's teaching us something, if we'd only listen." Her words drew silence for a moment. The younger Ranger's eyes softened, but the older one turned away, muttering into his radio. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She paced the bakery kitchen, the smell of rising dough heavy in the air. Outside, the street was empty, the town finally quiet. But in her mind, the noise roared on, voices of fear, of wonder, of policy, of profit. She pressed her palms against the cool counter and whispered into the stillness, as though the bear could somehow hear. "What are you doing to us?" At dawn, she opened the door and froze. He was there again. Waiting, as always. But this time he wasn't alone. 2 smaller shapes shifted in the mist behind him, awkward, bumbling, their movements clumsy but curious. "Cubs?" Her heart lurched into her throat. The bear hadn't just been waiting for himself. He'd been waiting for them. And now, everything had changed. Would the town accept not just one bear, but an entire family? Or would fear finally win? The cubs tumbled forward, their paws too big for their clumsy steps. One tripped over the cobblestones, rolled, and scrambled upright with a soft huff. The other sniffed at a flower box outside the bakery, tiny nose twitching before sneezing pollen into the morning air. The crowd that had already begun forming gasped as one. Children pressed their faces to their parents' sides, half scared, half delighted. "Oh my goodness," someone whispered. "They're adorable," another murmured. But Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Cubs changed everything. She knew enough about bears to understand the risk. Where cubs wandered, danger followed. Not from them, but from the protective force of their mother. One wrong move, one sudden noise, and this peaceful scene could explode. The big bear, their mother, Sarah realized with awe, remained seated just outside the bakery door, her gaze flicking calmly between the cubs and Sarah. There was no aggression in her eyes, only watchfulness. Sarah knelt low, trying to make herself small. "It's all right," she whispered, though the words were more for the town than the animals. "Just don't crowd them." But already, phones were out. Cameras clicked. Someone whispered too loudly, "We're going viral again." The younger cub waddled forward, drawn by the warm scent drifting from the bakery. He pressed his nose against the doorframe, so close Sarah could feel his breath through the crack. The crowd melted into laughter, their fear dissolving in the sight of his innocence. But then a sharp voice cut through. "This is exactly why it has to end." The older ranger pushed forward, jaw set like stone. His hand hovered near the tranquilizer at his belt. "Cubs raised around humans? That's a recipe for disaster. If they grow up thinking this is normal, they'll never survive in the wild. And the first time food runs out, they'll turn desperate. That's when people get hurt." The crowd murmured uneasily, torn again. "But look at them," someone protested. "They're harmless." "Harmless now," the ranger snapped. But not for long. Sarah rose slowly to her feet, her voice steady but trembling underneath. "They're not asking for anything but food. They're not raiding garbage or breaking into homes. They're learning patience. Just like their mother." The younger ranger stepped forward, her expression conflicted. "She's right about that. I've never seen cubs so calm around people. Normally, this would be chaos. They'd be climbing, growling, charging at anything that moved. But these," she trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. The older ranger's hand tightened on his radio. "Calm or not, this can't continue. We have to relocate them. Tonight." A sharp cry broke out from the crowd. "Relocate? Where?" "Out of here," he said flatly. "Somewhere remote. Where they belong." Sarah's chest squeezed. She glanced at the cubs, now batting playfully at each other, their soft huffs rising like laughter. And then at their mother, still seated patiently, still watching with an almost human intensity. She couldn't shake the thought, they chose this place. They chose to wait. Her voice broke through the noise. "And if they don't survive the move? What then? You think ripping them from the only rhythm they've known won't destroy them?" Silence fell for a beat. The older ranger's jaw flexed, but he didn't answer. Instead, Mr. Kincaid stepped forward, cane tapping sharply. "Enough of this fairy tale. Bears don't belong at bakeries. You're risking every child in this town because you can't see the truth. If the rangers won't do it, then maybe the rest of us should." His words ignited a fresh wave of fear. Parents pulled children back. Neighbors muttered angrily. The fragile thread of awe that the cubs had spun began to unravel. Sarah's pulse spiked. She could see it happening, fear rising, logic drowning. One wrong move, one panicked shout, and the cubs could be branded threats forever. She stepped onto the bakery's stoop, voice ringing louder than she thought she could manage. "Stop." The crowd froze. Even the cubs paused, their little heads swiveling toward her. "You all talk about danger," she said, breath heaving. "But what about choice? These animals had every chance to take what they wanted. They could have raided, attacked, torn through this street like the stories you all fear. But they didn't. They waited. And now their cubs are waiting too. Doesn't that mean anything?" The younger ranger looked away, conflicted. The older one scowled deeper, but his hesitation betrayed a crack in his certainty. The crowd shifted, caught between awe and fear. And then, just as Sarah thought maybe, just maybe, she had steadied the storm, a car door slammed shut at the edge of the street. The cubs flinched. Their mother's head snapped up. The calm she had held so tightly began to splinter. What happens when fear and noise push a protective mother bear to her limit? The sound of the car door slammed like a gunshot through the quiet street. The cubs jerked upright, their ears twitching, eyes wide. One bolted clumsily toward its mother, tripping over its paws in panic. The other froze in place, trembling, too scared to move. The mother bear rose at once. The slow patience of earlier melted into a sudden, commanding presence. Her shoulders hunched, her frame towering as she shifted protectively between her cubs and the source of the noise. Gasps tore through the crowd. Parents pulled children back. "She's standing up. Get inside." Sarah's breath hitched, her body buzzing with fear. This was it, the edge she had prayed they wouldn't reach. The tourists by the car stood frozen, one man still gripping his camera, too stunned to lower it. The bear's dark eyes locked on him, sharp and unblinking. The older ranger seized his chance. "Now do you see?" His hand darted for his tranquilizer, voice like gravel. "One more second and she's charging." "No." Sarah's voice cracked raw. She could feel the panic surging like wildfire, not in the bear, but in the people. If fear ruled this moment, there would be no turning back. She threw herself forward before her own terror could stop her. "Everyone back," she shouted, her arms spread wide, body blocking the bakery steps. "Don't move. Don't scream. Just breathe." Her eyes darted to the cub frozen near her doorframe. The little thing was trembling, caught between the safety of its mother and the warmth of the bakery. Its tiny claws scraped against the wood, indecisive. Sarah knelt low, lowering her voice to a whisper only the cub could hear. "It's all right, little one. Go on. She's waiting for you." The cub blinked, chest heaving in short pants. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though the whole town held its breath alongside it. Then, with a tiny whimper, the cub bolted toward its mother. The mother bear lowered her great head, nudging both cubs close to her legs. She didn't roar, didn't lunge, she simply pressed them into the safety of her shadow, her eyes never leaving the crowd. Sarah exhaled, knees weak. That could have been the breaking point. But the bears had chosen retreat, not aggression. The younger ranger whispered, awestruck. "She's restraining herself." The older ranger shook his head violently. "No, she's warning us. Next time it won't stop here." His hand still hovered near his tranquilizer, knuckles white. Sarah turned on him, her own fear sharpening into anger. "Do you not see? She didn't charge. She didn't attack. She protected her cubs, exactly as any of us would protect our children." The crowd shifted again, whispers rippling. Some nodded, others still clutched each other tight. But before anyone could answer, the cubs made the next move. One of them, emboldened by the safety of its mother's side, waddled back toward the bakery steps. It nosed at a basket Sarah had left outside, yesterday's leftover rolls wrapped in paper. The cub tugged one free, squeaked happily, and dropped back beside its sibling to share. A nervous laugh broke from the crowd. The tension thinned, fragile but real. The mother bear remained upright, towering but steady, her attention split between her cubs and the humans. She didn't interfere. She didn't punish. She simply allowed them to eat in peace. It was the most ordinary scene, a family breakfast, in the most extraordinary place. Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. "You see," she whispered. "They're not here to hurt us. They're here because they trust us. But the older ranger's voice cut through again, heavy with authority. Trust or not, this ends tonight. I'll be filing for immediate relocation orders. The words hit Sarah like ice water. Relocation. She knew what that meant: tranquilizers, crates, and miles of wilderness where no bread waited. And the risk that the cubs, so dependent on their mother's teaching, might not survive the shock of it. The crowd stirred uneasily. Some agreed, murmuring that safety had to come first. Others argued fiercely, shouting that the bears belonged now as much as any of them. The divide had never felt sharper. Sarah's gaze drifted back to the bear family, watching them tear soft pieces of bread together, crumbs dotting their fur. For a moment, the street was silent but for the sound of chewing, a sound so ordinary it almost broke her heart. And she realized then, this wasn't just about a bear at her bakery. It was about what her town would choose to be. Fearful or brave. Divided or united. She closed her eyes briefly, a plan forming, reckless and desperate, but the only one she could live with. If the Rangers were coming tonight, then tonight she would have to act first. What could Sarah possibly do to protect the bear family before the Rangers' return at nightfall? By sunset, Pine Hollow was buzzing like a hive split open. The bakery's back room, usually filled with the quiet hum of ovens, was now a refuge where Sarah sat trembling at the edge of a stool, flour still dusting her apron. Outside, the town argued in the street. Some demanded the Rangers act immediately, others pleaded for patience, for compassion. But Sarah knew one thing for certain: the Rangers wouldn't wait much longer. She had seen the look on the older Ranger's face when he said relocation. There had been no hesitation, no doubt. To him, the bear family was a problem, and problems had one solution: removal. And maybe, though she hated the thought, maybe he was right in his way. Bears didn't belong on sidewalks, sitting in front of bakeries like loyal customers. Yet, as she pressed her flour-dusted palms together, Sarah couldn't stop remembering the cub's tiny nose against her doorframe, the mother's calm restraint, the way the family had shared bread like it was the most natural thing in the world. She whispered into the quiet, "They don't deserve to pay for our fear." Outside, headlights swept over the street. The Rangers were back. 3 trucks again, radios hissing. Men and women in uniforms climbed out with crates and long poles. Tranquilizer rifles glinted under the street lamps. The crowd stirred nervously. Parents ushered children indoors. Those who supported the relocation muttered, "Finally." Others shouted angrily, "You can't take them. They've done nothing wrong." The town teetered on the edge of chaos. Sarah's heart pounded as she stepped outside, forcing her voice steady. "What are you planning?" The older Ranger didn't sugarcoat it. "We'll sedate them, load them in the transport crates, and move them before dawn. The longer they stay here, the greater the risk." End of discussion. The younger Ranger avoided Sarah's eyes. Sarah felt her throat tighten. She could already see it unfolding: the loud cracks of tranquilizer darts, the cubs' panicked cries, the mother thrashing before the drugs dragged her down. A memory the town would never forget, not as wonder, but as violence. Her pulse raced. If she let this happen, the fragile story of patience and peace would vanish forever. And so, when no one was watching, she slipped away. The path behind the bakery wound upward into the trees. Sarah carried a canvas bag, filled not with fear but with bread, loaves she'd set aside while the rest of the town argued. The air was cool, pine-scented. Shadows stretched long under the rising moon. She walked quickly, her feet crunching softly on gravel. Every step, her mind echoed, "This is madness. You're walking into the forest alone at night with a bear family." But another voice was louder, "Better me than them." She didn't have to walk far. At the edge of the clearing, she saw them, the mother and her cubs, nestled just beyond the streetlights, as though they knew the line they weren't supposed to cross. The cubs perked up at her approach, bumbling forward with little squeaks. The mother rose halfway, her head tilting, dark eyes steady on Sarah. Sarah stopped a safe distance away, her chest heaving. She lowered the canvas bag slowly, pulling out a loaf. She broke it in half and laid the pieces on the ground between them. The cubs scurried forward, nibbling eagerly. The mother followed, silent but watchful. Sarah whispered, barely daring to breathe, "They're coming tonight. If you stay, they'll take you. But if you go now, deeper into the forest, maybe you'll be safe." Her voice cracked. She didn't know if the bear understood a single word. Maybe she was speaking more to herself, to the night. The mother bear bent her great head, sniffed at the bread, then nudged a cub gently toward it. Her restraint was the same as always, deliberate, patient. Sarah's vision blurred with tears. She wanted to believe that meant something, that the bear had chosen patience for a reason. She laid down another loaf, then another, forming a slow trail that curved away from the town, deeper into the mountain woods. Each time, the cubs followed, and their mother followed them. Step by step, bread by bread, Sarah led them toward safety. Her hands shook with exhaustion, with fear, with the crushing weight of knowing this might not work. But when she turned back, the glow of the bakery was distant, the rangers' voices faint. Ahead, the forest stretched wide and dark. The bears paused at the tree line. The mother looked back once, eyes catching the moonlight. For a breathless moment, Sarah swore she felt something pass between them, not words, not understanding, but recognition. And then, with a low grunt, the mother turned and guided her cubs into the shadow of the trees. Sarah stood frozen, clutching the empty bag to her chest, tears streaking her flour-dusted face. By the time she returned, the rangers were already on her doorstep. The older one glared at her, suspicion burning in his eyes. "Where were you?" Sarah forced her voice calm, though her heart still raced. "Inside. Baking." The younger ranger studied her, gaze searching. But she said nothing. The older one huffed, gesturing to his team. "We move now. Bring the crates." They fanned out into the night. Flashlights pierced the darkness, beams crisscrossing the empty street. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The rangers came back, muttering. One shook his head. Another cursed under his breath. "They're gone," someone said finally. "Vanished into the trees." The older ranger's jaw clenched so tightly Sarah thought it might snap. "We'll track them at first light." But Sarah knew the truth. They wouldn't find them. Not now. Not after tonight. Her chest ached with a mixture of relief and dread. She had saved them from one fate, but she had no idea what tomorrow would bring. Did Sarah's midnight act truly save the bear family, or only delay the inevitable? Morning came slowly, washing the streets of Pine Hollow in pale gold. The night's chaos had left the town strangely quiet, like a stage after the actors had gone. Trucks were still parked near the square, but the rangers leaned against them, arms crossed, their faces heavy with frustration. Sarah stood at her bakery window, watching as people drifted out of their houses, whispering to one another. Children tugged at parents' hands, asking where the bears had gone. No one had a clear answer. She pulled a tray of fresh bread from the oven, the familiar scent filling the room. It was comforting, steadying, but her heart still carried the weight of last night. She had guided the family away, yes, but would they stay gone? Or had she only delayed what the Rangers were determined to do? At mid-morning, the younger ranger knocked at her door. Sarah opened it cautiously, flour dust clinging to her sleeves. He didn't accuse her. He didn't demand answers. Instead, he looked down at the bread in her hands and said quietly, "You led them out, didn't you?" Sarah's breath caught. Her instinct was to deny it. But something in his tone, not sharp, but curious, maybe even hopeful, made her pause. After a long silence, she nodded. "I couldn't let it happen here. Not like that." The ranger sighed, glancing back at the street where his colleagues checked gear half-heartedly. "You know, sometimes the best outcome isn't the one written in the manual." His gaze lifted to hers. "I won't say anything." Relief washed through her. She managed a whisper. "Thank you." By noon, news had spread. The bears were gone. No one had seen them since the night before. Some townsfolk were disappointed. They had wanted answers, or at least closure. Others were quietly relieved. Parents no longer feared for their children walking to school. Farmers checked their livestock pens without dread. But among the bakery's regulars, a new kind of story took hold. Customers leaned over the counter to whisper, "Did you hear how calm they always were? My boy says the baker fed them like family. They weren't dangerous. They just wanted bread." Bit by bit, the story of fear transformed into a story of patience. And at the center of it all was the quiet woman with flour-dusted hands, who had looked at a bear family not as a threat, but as something worth protecting. That evening, Sarah closed early. She carried a basket of unsold loaves up the hill behind the bakery, following the path where she had left them the night before. The forest was still. Only birdsong broke the silence. She walked until the last rooftops of Pine Hollow disappeared behind her. At the tree line, she placed the basket down. For a moment, she let herself imagine the cubs bounding forward, the mother emerging with her steady eyes. But the woods stayed empty. Maybe they were miles away now. Maybe they had followed the trail deeper and deeper until the town was only a distant scent. That was what she hoped for. She placed the bread carefully at the forest's edge, then whispered, "Be safe." Weeks passed. The bears never returned to the bakery. Hunters in the region swore they saw tracks deeper in the mountain ranges, but none ever led back to Pine Hollow. For the town, life moved on. Yet the story lingered, retold over coffee, passed from one neighbor to another. And each retelling softened it. The fear bled away, replaced by wonder. Sarah never confirmed her midnight walk with the bread. Some suspected, others knew in their hearts. But she didn't need recognition. Every morning, as she opened her bakery, she looked at the empty street where the mother had once sat so patiently, waiting for fresh bread. And in that stillness, she carried a memory no one could take away. One autumn afternoon, a child tugged at Sarah's apron while she arranged loaves on the counter. "Miss Sarah," the girl asked, eyes wide, "do you think the bears will ever come back?" Sarah crouched down, meeting her gaze. The girl's innocence reminded her of the cubs, their little noses pressed against the door. "I don't know," Sarah said gently. "But if they do, I hope it's because they feel safe." The child smiled, as though that answer was enough. She skipped away, clutching a loaf nearly bigger than her head. Sarah stood, watching her go. She realized then that the story of the bears had given Pine Hollow something unexpected, A reminder of gentleness in a world that too often chose fear. That night, as the bakery lights dimmed, Sarah lingered at the window. The moon hung high, silvering the rooftops. The forest beyond was quiet, mysterious, eternal. She thought of the mother bear's eyes, calm, patient, filled with a depth she couldn't name. Maybe it had only been instinct. Or maybe, in some unspoken way, the bear had understood her too. Either way, the bond they had shared, brief but profound, would live on. Not just in Sarah's memory, but in the stories the town told, stories of patience, compassion, and the unlikely connection between a baker and a bear who waited for bread. In the end, the bear family left as quietly as they arrived. But they left behind something far greater than paw prints. They left a story of patience and peace. Would you have led them into the forest, as Sarah did? Or would you have let the rangers decide their fate? If you believe more people should hear stories like this, about choosing empathy over fear, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling the quiet, powerful truths of nature.